All right, so this course, this iteration, this summertime going through, normally at this point, I would have, at the end of the first week, I would have given you really copious, comprehensive feedback on your first post, your day one, day two. This is a session where OISE is doing things very differently. So that comprehensive feedback I normally would have given after periods of posts on the discussion forums is not happening. But I am going through collectively what you've posted. When you pose specific questions, I'm extracting that and trying to answer that in the morning or I guess late night discussion forum summaries. And as we get closer to the performance tasks, I'll give more feedback on those. But this is a leadership course. And the reason why you're taking this is because you're aspiring for leadership or you're in a leadership position, and you meet this accreditation or something along those lines. So at some points throughout this course, I will find a particular aspect, unless you specifically say, hey, I have a very specific question about this. Can we address this as a class, kind of? And then I'll give my experiential history, and I'll try to address some of those. So as I look at this screen here, we're on section 2.2.2, guided exploration. And you'll see that there's these leadership reflection prompts, and the prompts are not things that you're posting on the discussion forums. You are collecting them in your journal, log, whatever you're using to determine your process throughout this course. So that way, when it comes to the end, when you're doing your performance tasks, it's just dropping it in without actually doing it from scratch. You don't want to do that at the end. I know some of you are still waiting for specific dates, still working on it. I'm still trying to get a feel for what it is that you're creating, how the conversations are going. I noticed that some of you did not do day one, I guess, module 0, we'll call it, getting started, and module 1, based on the timelines that are posted. Please note when I do give the summaries in the nighttime or in the morning, that I only include those who've made the deadline based on the calendar. So if you're after that, then you're not going to be incorporated in that feedback or whatnot. It isn't previous iterations where the discussion forums is counting for 50%. So some of you are taking advantage of that and just kind of going at your own pace. But recognize that your own pace works until we get to the end where there is an absolute deadline. The course is going to end and things need to be submitted and assessed. As I take a look at this, so if I am a leader in a department and I'm focusing on the curriculum through the professional competency lens, as I look at the front matter of your curriculum, in many cases as teachers, we are so focused on developing our assessment plan or unit plan that we are not really focused on the front matter, because the front matter has all that information around the engineering design process, around STSE, but we don't use that in the new language. We use other types of pedagogies, but it does amount to application of science in an outer context of the classroom. So as a curriculum leader, as a department leader, bringing the department's attention back to that front matter is a really good way to align your department. Sometimes you might have difficulty in trying to have your department communicate in a collegial professional manner that has a student-centered, and that often happens because certain people have a favorite concept or content that they just enjoy so much that they must teach it. So let's say completing the equation in grade 10 science. You get a lot of chemists who teach grade 10 chemistry, and so they insist upon doing that, but it's not a part of the curriculum. It definitely helps them for grade 11, but right. So focusing on that front matter sometimes really helps get people aligned. Program goals and expectations. So if you are running a science department, then one of the things that you're going to want to focus on and decide as a department, this should be a collegial conversation, is where is the focus of the department? Are you focusing on inquiry? If so, how much are you embedding the inquiry in the teaching and learning? So are you doing ensuring that every single grade 9 and grade 10 program has inquiry every day, every other day, once a week? Are you doing a predict, observe, explain model? What is it that you're going to do to ensure that there's consistency from grade 9 and grade 10? And then that's leading up to the grade 11 and grade 12. Often it's nice to start at the end. So you might start at the end of grade 10, knowing that every single student must take 2 credits of science. Or you can start at the end of grade 12 with the prototypical learner that you think you want to design your entire program for. It's really up to you. But your program goals and expectations is something that you should lead that conversation in your department. Inquiry is very engaging. A lot of times teachers might not necessarily leap on that opportunity because doing inquiry well requires more work. You have to set up labs, take down labs, understand what the things are doing. If you're not comfortable working with chemicals or working with petri dishes and bacteria or working with electricity, then you might lean towards doing something more theoretical. In many cases, when you have issues with low enrollments or behavioral attitudes in class, that's often because students are engaged in your program. And one of the surest ways to engage students in science is getting them doing. If you look at what they're doing in elementary classes and why they love it, even though they're not recognizing necessarily that it's science and technology that they're doing, is because it's so engaging, it's so hands-on. So don't lose that in the senior courses and try to incorporate that in your programs. So that's kind of the program goals, inquiry skills, all these pieces here. There's so many different types of inquiry-based pedagogies. You don't need to focus on a single one, but as a department leader, you might want to pull one or two and share that with the department and give them a strategy so that they're able to have some kind of structure. And then there'll be less excuse. There'll be hopefully more buy-in. And feel free to use a distributive leadership model and have leaders in the teams that are designing particular inquiry, investigations, experiences, whatever you want to call it. And then they're sharing it back to the team, or have everyone contribute one per week. And then you kind of go to the pot and pick the one that's kind of best for your teaching style or the learning style of the students. We all have our own teaching styles, but sometimes our teaching styles don't necessarily match with all the learning styles in the class. So having a diverse team that's contributing, excellent. Achievement chart. So assessment plans are incredibly important. Again, as a department head leading a science department, you want to make sure that that assessment plan is set. Have some kind of structure, at least have a conversation, ensure that your larger teams in particular have a common assessment plan. A common assessment plan does not mean you're moving lockstep through the course, but it does mean that you have a common understanding of how assessment is going to work in the class. You're going to have a common breakdown of the assessment categories. You're going to decide whether or not you're breaking down knowledge, inquiry, communication, application into the various activities, or are you designing activities knowing that those are embedded, and so then you're doing activity-based assessment. And there's no real right or wrong. Just make sure you have the conversation and it's consistent among your group. And then typically what you do in grade 9, you want to do in grade 10, keep it consistent with the junior courses. And then your senior courses might diverge a bit. It's possible your chemistry, physics, and bio might have slightly different assessment strategies. I mean, they're different courses, but they're all science. And even though we're looking at different skills per se and different content, the overall desire to have students have an understanding of senior sciences is typically the same regardless of what letter code that they might be enrolled in. So assessment plans, incredibly important, and it's a great place to typically step away from a lot of the attachment people have to activities. Look at the assessment plan. Does this particular activity experience, does it match with the assessment plan? Is it meeting the curricular expectations? And if so, then yeah, we can keep it. Specific expectations. So that is content. So this is a great place for people to be a little bit more personal, because there's different ways of teaching the content, but have some common experiences as well. And that's where good cohesive teams come together really nicely. Literacy and numeracy. This is an area where you're able to make connections to EQAO, however long that's going to last. You're also able to bring teams, and they're able to tie in some excellent literacy strategies that the entire school is using. So it brings the science department in line with maybe school pillars around what's important for student success. The same thing goes with numeracy, but stepping back specifically into the science program, as a team, you should sit down with the entire science department, ideally, and determine what are the numeracy and what are the literacy goals of the program. What must students be comfortable with numbers? Should they be able to graph? Should they be able to extrapolate? Should they be able to do basic algebra? Should they be able to, right? And for literacy, should they be able to parse through a paragraph and understand the key words? Should they be able to critically read and understand who is missing, who is centered, what happens if you switch the focus on the audience, those sorts of things. So as a department, that's a great conversation. Of course, all these things take time. Are you meeting before school, lunchtime, after school? Do a common lunch? Now in this day and age in 2026, we don't have as often as we once used to these department meetings that happen after school or before school. But if you do in your school, great. If you don't, you'll have to figure out some other strategy. Indigenous perspectives, environmental education, STSE sections. I know it's all clumped into one. They can be related, but they also could be really quite disparate depending on how you design your program. And this is a 10-minute video already, so I think I'm going to actually end there. So I'll come back to Indigenous perspectives, environmental education, STSE sections, as well as policy context a little bit later, even though I know that de-streaming has already been brought up in some of the Module 1 conversations. I will say this, that as a department head, even though you might not agree with the ministry policy, you are the administrator's extension into the curricular areas to ensure that the will of the ministry has been carried out, let's say. So even though you're not a fan of de-streaming, of which some of you indicated what your problems and issues are with it, you are still trying your best to figure out strategies that will help your students and help your teachers teach your students, facilitate their journey through the streaming SNC 1W and eventually into the 10 academic or applied, depending on what board you're in, and then into the senior courses, whether that's workplace, university, or college. And what you'll find is it's really easy to just fall into that negative loop about everything that is going wrong and how if you were in charge of whatever was happening at the provincial level, it would be different. But at the end of the day, with your department, in order to keep you moving forward, maybe try to keep those kind of conversations to the places outside the professional discussion and focus on strategies that will be successful for your students and your teachers. And if you do that, then you'll probably have a more successful journey with your department. If you go into the negative sense, especially with more impressionable teachers, they'll kind of follow that kind of negative talk, and then you end up with kind of a negative vibe in the department, and that's a really uncomfortable place to be. So yeah, we'll talk more about de-streaming a little bit later in this class, and maybe some of you will focus on that in your performance tasks. Thank you.